Well, today we're talking about if you're trying to consider which camera to get, the R5 or the R6, which one do I think you should pick up? Spoiler alert, I kind of think it's the R6. Stick around to find out why. Well, hey, what's up? My name is Tony. I am a filmmaker photographer in the St. Louis area, and today we're talking about the R5 and the R6, which one you should get if you're trying to decide between these two, because they're pretty similar but kind of different and in a little bit different price points. So we're going to talk about these two, and just to let you know, I actually purchased these two cameras pre-ordered when Canon first announced them, and I tell you what, I was so excited about them. My story is I pre-ordered the R6 and then I realized that it didn't have IPB, so I canceled my pre-order and got an R5 pre-order. And as soon as the R6s hit the store, I actually just picked up one. So I ended up with an R6 before the R5 and kind of fell in love with it, and I realized that IPB wasn't that big of a deal, and so I started actually shooting all of my footage in IPB, including on the R5, even though it does all eye and all of these other things. The IPB just looks incredible. So ended up with an R5 and R6. I shoot these both for photo and video all the time. Every day I do both of them, and I really can't tell the difference, to be honest with you, of the quality. So what I want to do is just talk to you a little bit about the difference between these two cameras if you're trying to decide, do you need to bump up to the R5 if you have the R6, or if you're looking at these two side by side, which one do you really need? And like I said, for most people, the R6 is just an incredible camera. Now, let's talk about the similarities between these two. These two cameras are very, very similar. What I love about having both the R5 and the R6 is they both do things a little bit differently, but they're so similar when it comes to the menu, when it comes to the button placement on the cameras, when it comes to the usability of them. When I pick up either camera, I really can't tell a difference when I'm shooting. The other thing is I can't tell a difference when I'm coloring, whether that's footage from a video or when I am editing photos. I really can't tell the difference either camera that I'm using, besides of course megapixels. Now, don't get scared with the 20 megapixels on the R6, because I can still shoot horizontal, and if I want to crop 4x5 or 9x16 for social media, I can still do that. Plenty of resolution. So let's talk about some of the photo similarities. When it comes to shooting on the R5 or the R6, I'm telling you, I can shoot one on my hand and one on my hip and swap them interchangeably with zero problems. They feel so similar. And then when I get home and I'm editing them, they align perfectly and you can't tell the difference, besides that megapixel count on file size. Like when I'm editing, I usually don't crop a ton, like 200, 300%. You might be able to tell on the R5, but for most applications, you're gonna be just fine with that 20 megapixels. Another feature that I really love that I didn't realize that I would be using is you can actually crop into the 1.6 to get that kind of APS-C look and reach. So on a 70 to 200, I'll punch into 1.6 and I can get all the way into 400 millimeters on either camera. And I really don't care. Like the quality, like I said, is just as good on either of those cameras, so I don't really worry about megapixels. Now, when it comes to video, that's where we see the difference between the R5 and the R6. Let's talk about the similarities real quick though. With either camera, I can shoot 4K, C-Log3, 10-bit color, 24 frames, 30 frames, 60 frames per second. And so for most people, I'm telling you, that's gonna cover the range that you need. Now, if you do wanna shoot 120, you can shoot it on the R6, but it's only 1080p, whereas on the R5, it bumps up to 4K. I personally don't shoot a lot of 120. I don't like my footage that slow. I'm just not doing things that are that fast for the most part, which is why it just fine. I very seldom shoot in super high frame rates. The other thing that's really similar is when I'm color grading, I can pretty much drop the same LUT or adjustment layer on top of my footage and then make minor tweaks according to exposure, or if I want it to look a little bit different or whatever. But for the most part, I'm using the same adjustment layer over both my R5 and my R6 footage. So, like I said, similar process when I'm shooting video when I am editing. Okay, so let's talk about some of the differences that I personally have noticed with these cameras. Like I said, the big difference is in the video. Video kind of separates the R5 and the R6. And this is where I will tell you if you're gonna be shooting a lot of really high frame rate. That's talking 120 or 60 frames per second. Even just 4K, like I'm not even talking about 8K yet. If you're shooting like long clips of 60 frames per second, which the reason that I shoot 60 frames per second is that I can slow it down in post-processing. That's the same reason that I shoot in 120, is that you keep it really slow motion and make it really beautiful and cinematic looking. I personally have found that I'm not slowing down my footage as much these days. Like most of my wedding edits, and I'm doing a lot more like interview style things where I want people talking. And so you're talking 24 frames per second to get that really cinematic look with real-time footage. And so personally, I haven't been shooting anything like over 60 pretty much in the past 2 years, but the 24 frames per second is where I'm kind of landing for most of my stuff. If you shoot a lot of 60 frames per second with long periods of clips, you may want to consider spending that extra $1,200 or whatever it is for the R5, because it will not overheat nearly as fast as the R6. Now, there's pros and cons to this, and a lot of people talk about overheating. I personally have not had my cameras like shut down overheat on me. I've seen the overheat light. I had somebody else borrow it and they overheated it. That's a big old discussion, but I'm telling you, you can still shoot 12-hour wedding days with the R6 without that thing overheating if you're smart. If you're shooting a lot of 60 frames per second because you want to slow it down and make it all beautiful, and you just keep shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting, yes, the thing will overheat. It's just a small camera with a lot of power in there. The R5 will also overheat, but just not as fast. I personally have been shooting most of my weddings, like I said, in 24 frames per second all day long. The ceremonies, the dances, the toasts, even the getting ready stuff. I just haven't been slowing it down. I feel like I just haven't been slowing my footage down as much. I feel like it's just a little bit more natural looking, and there's occasions when I do shoot in 60 or 120 frames per second, but for the most part, I'm just not shooting in those high frame rates. So if you shoot in 60 or 120 a lot, you may want to consider that R5. But I'm telling you, the R6 is very, very capable at shooting a wedding. And it's incredible. They look beautiful. The biggest downfall with shooting a long wedding is not either camera, it's the 30-minute limit that Canon puts on those. And I know that the R7 has kind of released that, and the R3, which is kind of exciting, but we still have those limitations with this R5 and the R6, so that doesn't really matter. It still works for me. I still get plenty of ceremonies, and I just have to make sure that I'm not shutting off all my cameras at once and kind of toggle those and then sync it in post. Now there's a couple other differences between the R5 and the R6. A noticeable one is the R5 has a CF Express Type B, so your transfer speeds when you're offloading the footage is a lot faster on the R5. I've appreciated that, but the cost of that memory is so much more than an SD card. So that's something to consider as well. I have noticed if you use the 300 megabit, like the UHS 2 cards on the R6 or the R5, that speeds up your transfer rates. The other difference that I've noticed is that the screen is slightly larger on the R5, the back screen, but I mean, like I said, in the moment, I do not notice the difference between those two screen sizes. Another really big deal for some people, this is not a big deal for me, is the top on the R5 has a little menu that you can see. It's a little screen and you hit the mode button to get into those custom modes, whereas the R6 has a dial. For me, it really doesn't matter because I'm not using custom modes. Now, if you are somebody who wants to use custom modes for video, then the R5 is the option for you because the R6 doesn't offer it. Like I said, for me, I'm fast enough with my settings. I know my way around the camera. If I need to switch something real quick, I've got it dialed onto a button, or I know how to get to it really fast. So that dial on the top doesn't really matter for me with the R6. And then one more big advantage for the R5 that we haven't talked about is that 8K raw footage, which is beautiful. I have only shot it for examples with YouTube, and then it gets compressed and it gets scaled down to 4K and it doesn't even matter. So unless you are using this camera in a studio with high quality, you need 8K raw, you could pick up the R5, but I'm telling you, if I'm gonna shoot 8K, it's not gonna be on a mirrorless camera that's gonna have battery problems, and it's just not nearly like suited for what I would need in a studio that's shooting 8K raw. There's plenty of other options for that, but they're much more expensive. But at the end of the day, both of these cameras, I personally feel, will get you the same kind of quality that you're gonna see when you're delivering to a client or you're delivering on YouTube or doing whatever you want. Like I said, I truly believe that the R6 is the camera for most people. It is incredible, it is beautiful, it does great work, and you're gonna end up with an extra 1,200 bucks that you can throw at some lenses. Right now, we're shooting on the R5 because I've only got one R6 available to me right now, and I've got the R5 here, and I wanted to have them both in my hands. But we're shooting on the R5. I almost always shoot my videos on the R6 for YouTube with the 50mm f1.8. And the reason why is because I want you to see that for 2,500 bucks, you can get a beautiful setup, full frame, 10-bit, 4K. I love the R6, and I find myself using that one more daily because one, the file sizes are smaller with photos, and two, it works so well, and I love it. So those are my thoughts. I would love to hear what are some of the big differences that maybe persuade you one way or the other for the R5 or the R6. So leave that in the comment section, and I promise you I will respond to it, and I would love for others to speak into it as well. So leave a comment in the comment section below. If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. We talk a whole bunch of stuff about Canon mirrorless, and if you want to be notified, hit the bell. Other than that, hope you have a great week, and we will see you in the next video.